Hey, morning, guys. Thanks for coming to the lecture today. Hope more people will stream in later. This is Jacqueline Yeo from Plystudio, also a very good friend of mine. Last night when I texted her, I said, "Can you send me your bio?" She said, "Can you just tell them you are she is my long-suffering archipel." Yeah, and whenever we have time, we drink wine to drink our sorrows away. So anyway, yeah, very happy to have my really good friend here today to share. Plystudio, as you might think, stands for plywood ply. No, it's not. It's practice of Lee and Yeo. Victor Lee is Jack's husband, and she's Jacqueline Yeo. So actually, ply is practice of Lee and Yeo, and she's the Yeo of ply. And you might be interested to know that she and Victor are actually the designers behind LaSalle, our campus. So later, if you have any complaints about the school, you can tell her. This morning, I told her, I said, hey, you meet me at the Central Green, I bring you up. Then later, I feel very stupid. She designed the school, why I must tell her where the lecture theatres are. Okay, anyway, jokes aside. So this morning, we have Jacqueline Yeo. Jacqueline is a registered architect in the UK and co-founder of Plystudio Architects. She graduated at the Architectural Association in London after completing her undergraduate studies at National University of Singapore School of Architecture. Jacqueline is a keen educator and is currently a design tutor at the Department of Architecture, National University of Singapore. For years, she has been a design critic and guest review at various other design schools. She's interested in the craft of building buildings with a specific focus on the materiality, craft, and technology to drive the notion of building economy. So let's put our hands together for Jacqueline Yeo, Plystudio.
Thanks, Kelly. Hi, everybody. Good to see you all on a midweek morning. So I don't know how much you know about architecture. I guess you have had the very good pleasure of meeting with a couple of Kelly's good friends as well the past 2 weeks or so, I think. And they have been talking about different types of work that they do, what drives them, etc. So I think today is a very informal session. I think I'm very happy to take like Q&A after the session of the talk. And really just an introduction to how we see architecture being a very small practice and a very Singaporean, very small practice in this part of the world. So hopefully, after today, you have a little bit of a other understanding of what we do. So without further ado, I'll start. This is a very old meme. You probably think that it's very old-fashioned, but I think you see this a lot. What other people think we do, I guess, in your field as well. What your mom thinks you do, what society thinks you do, or what they expect you to do. What my contractor think I do, and actually what I really do on a day-to-day basis. So I don't just do toilets, of course, but so to bring it a little bit more up to date, so I asked like ChatGPT. So what does an architect do, right? So you can go and read later on. You can ask ChatGPT the same thing, and then they have a whole slew of reply on what an architect does. So it's very long. So as you can see, an architect does a lot of things from design all the way to professional submissions, etc., etc. So at the heart of it, I think what I really wanted to showcase is how you would want to think as an architect. I think that's something that we feel very strongly, and that's something that we try to teach as well when we teach in NUS. So the other side of being an architect or growing old is really how do you want to live your life, right? I mean, you are all at the start of your future careers. What drives you, right? Is it time? Is it money? How much energy do you have to do all those things? So when you're very young, like how you guys are now, you have a lot of time, but you have very little money, right? But you have a lot of energy to do a lot of things. Then as you grow older, you get more money, you get better paid, hopefully. And then as you grow old, you have a lot of money, you have a lot of time, but you have very little energy. But then the sad reality is, as an architect, you actually have very little of everything. So hopefully y'all won't get to that. It is not supposed to be so sad, like, even though Kelley says that we drink wine all the time too, because we are like that little person on the right hand side. So back to being serious. The most, I guess, the earliest form of architecture that has been documented is a primitive hut by Logier, which is in 1700s. It is the kind of most basic form of architecture, right? So if you see and know what architecture is, like this building, for example, it's hardly anything that you see in a primitive hut. Architecture has always also been like a good mix of the science. So the sciences like the golden ratio, the proportions, Pythagoras theorem, all those sort of like mathematical sciencey bits, and also a very art portion of it. So how do you do it aesthetically? How do you bring out something that is very artistic? So architecture has always, for me, been a very good balance of both of them. So you kind of also need to use your left brain a little bit and your right brain a little bit when you're doing architecture. So who are we, right? Thanks for the introduction, Kelley. And we founded the firm quite a long time ago now, actually. We came back to Singapore from our studies in London and working in London. We joined a very big firm called RSP Architects, which was where we won the competition to design this building, LaSalle. That was very, very long ago. I shall not yet tell you the year, but it was probably before you guys were born. I still remember doing the design for this building, going through, I mean, you can see the facades, they are very random, right? So that's the artistic part of it. But then all the things need to work, like your sprinklers need to work, your structure need to work and all that. And that's the sciencey part of it, right? So even in a building like this, and this is the best example of, I guess, how we try to think about things, we like to see ourselves as a studio not just confined to just doing architecture, but actually a whole range of works from interior to furniture to sometimes exhibitions, etc., just to push the thinking of what it means throughout our education and trying to put it back into what we practice. So Ply, while it also stands for practice of Li and Yu, it also has this fundamental sort of description or explanation of the word ply, which is a bit like plying a trade. So we feel that architecture is not about art, where it's not like art where you can just do whatever has your whim and fancy, right? You need to somehow still fulfill the things that the client has asked of you. So it is, in a way, plying a sort of trade in that sense. How we started in 2008, where we were asked to join a group of creatives. I think some of them who exhibited here are actually your tutors now in LaSalle. It was for the Venice Biennale, and we represented Singapore as part of the collective of creatives that went there that year. What we do on a day-to-day basis, we practice architecture. We teach, of course, in NUS, and then of course we also try to do as much as possible these lectures and talks and exhibitions that we participate in, so that we can really kind of offer a different way of how we look at architecture. So I think this pretty much sums up how we do it. So we like to be able to position ourselves usually as what I said before. It's not really something that we pluck out of the sky, or it's not something that we dream of out of nowhere. We position ourselves in the sort of questions that the client might have, or the client who is commissioning you might want you to achieve. And then we try to situate ourselves with also a body of research that we have been compiling through the years. So as you first start off, you probably wouldn't have much research, right? But because we have been practicing for a number of years, we do have a body of research. And also with the teaching that we have been doing in NUS, we have built up a body of research. So that also helps to inform the way we design. And then finally, we put everything together and that becomes the design. So in the next few projects, I'll try and show you what we feel is a good way of using an architectural education to approach different projects in different scales. So one example was a project that we had in Hainan Island. It's a hotel, and it's actually not at the coast of Hainan. So all those who know Hainan, it's actually a coastal town, a little bit like Hawaii, or a lot of like resorts are built there. So this client came to us and he said, "Oh, I have like 450 rooms that I want to build, but unfortunately, I'm not right at the water's edge. So how can I make my hotel still appeal?" So to us, I think what we opportunistically tried to do was, first of all, use our right brain to put all the rooms into an Excel sheet. So this is actually Excel, and we thought that it would be quite interesting to actually divide it very equally into four strict blocks. But how do you make the blocks interesting without it just be looking like some repetitive block that is going to be a wall in a way, right, to the whole city? So we started to look at, hey, maybe each quadrant can have a character of its own, and the quadrant itself can also be then multiplied by just flipping it around and mirroring it. And that became really the plan. So in our practice, we also very much enjoy very simple geometry. So things like circles and squares, we feel like a bit like the golden ratio. There is a logic behind why it's simple, right? It's simple to construct, it's simple to organize, and it's simple to repeat and mirror. In another scale, this is a very, very small project. This was actually in the old, so Design for Enterprise actually became Design Singapore. So when they first started, it was in a very small space that is purely interior. And we wanted to also then use the logo that you see at the bottom here to create a sort of spatial identity of the space. So instead of creating forms that are very much in competition with the logo, we decided to, how about just using the logo but creating spatial types out of it? So we devised like this divider, and they are actually made out of a composite of all the different spaces that can actually move about. So it actually helps to create flexible rooms within a larger room space. So that was a very fun project, and to me it was also very interesting because it really comes back down to the crafting of the space. It literally is crafting each piece and putting it together and trying to put it together in a larger space to create the sort of spatial identity of this little office. This is actually still around. If you go to Changi City Point, surprisingly, it has been more than 15 years, I think, since it was constructed. So, Soup Spoon were close friends of ours, and they came to us with their biggest as yet outlet at Changi City Point, and they wanted it to be divided into dining spaces without feeling like you are in a big open space. So, how do you do that without making the space feel tight and claustrophobic? So we wanted also to then push the idea of that was way, way, way before farm to table came about, but they wanted also to have herbs that are growing, and that kind of gives the customers an idea that they are eating very fresh produce. So those arbors, so we thought, hey, how about we combine two types of form, right? The form of an arbor, which is really a garden construct, and that of a terrace that you sit outdoors, right? You are kind of eating under the stars or eating within the garden space. So we used the geometrical form of an arbor, and we repeated it, but we tweaked it a little bit so that there is a smaller arch going to a bigger arch. So we do this sort of spatial manipulations quite a lot for most of our projects that you'll see later on. And by doing so, you'll be able to fit in systematically a few of these dining alcoves into the whole plan. And of course, the fun bit is actually also to talk to the contractor. How do you actually build it? What are the kind of construction details that you put into it? So this is the part that is very, very engaging. And I think even if you go into like an architectural scale, shouldn't be lost. Sadly, sometimes it has been. So we try to teach our students a lot to also always come back to like the beginnings of what made you excited and really really wanted to do architecture, right? It's the whole touch and feel of where what actually it involves when you actually go into the space. So this is actually the final outcome of the space and also the drawings that we had to do to show the contractor how to build. This was before CNC, so they didn't even have CNC to do the arches when they were fabricating the plywood. So the title of our talk today is called Design Economy, and I think it really stems from this idea that a building economy has to come about from the way we think. Not so much like, I mean, you all know like economy rice, right? Where you just buy the cai fan and then you put in the meats and the vegetables, and it's a very economical way of having a meal. We feel that design should kind of also have that potential to be very economically driven, not just in terms of the monetary sense, but in terms of the way you think. So you don't need to think of a very complex solution to a complex problem. I think what we think is very interesting is to find the simplest solution to a complex problem. So a lot of times when we encounter clients, thanks. So they don't know how to break down their problem. So every, like when you go to like a hospital client, for example, it's like, oh, I need to have so many things. There are all these people using my space, even for a school, right? There's so many users of a school, so many things that you have to consider, not just the materiality and the structure. It's actually the users, etc. So we feel that what we try to do is how do you turn such a complex problem into a simple solution through the use of architectural thinking and architectural form, and how we actually talk to the clients about it is also quite key because they're the ones paying you, so you have to make them understand it. So we actually had this exhibition. I think Kahao was part of the exhibition, right? Yeah. So that was actually in 2019, some years back now. It was the inaugural exhibition where we presented our work, and in this exhibition called Small Firms, Big Ideas. So if you want to see more of our work, this is our website. I'm sure Kelley will share it with you later as well. But I think we go straight into why building economy is equals to design economy. So when I talk about economy, it's not just in the money dollars and cents way. It's not about like how much you pay for a building, although it does have repercussions on how much our clients eventually do spend on our projects. So we hope to show that through the way of thinking in this way of thinking, we can allow them to frame their position in whatever context that they want to sell their project or they want to use their project. So design economy to us, firstly, is structural rationalization. So structure is a thing that holds up the building. You all know that, right? I hope you do. But how do you then make structure visible? Structure should not just be invisible and is kind of embedded into the walls, etc. So we were given this opportunity in a project in KL. So I don't know how many of you know KL very well, but KL is famous for its traffic jams, right? So in order to get into KL city, it's always a huge traffic situation to get in. And so our clients, who are actually one of the largest developers in Malaysia, they decided to seed a sort of town away from the city. So it's going to be the KL's nearest subcenter to the KLIA, which is the KL International Airport. It's about the size of Ang Mo Kio. If you know, the size of Ang Mo Kio is going to be an entirely new town going to be planned there. So we were given the opportunity to create the sales gallery for this huge township that's going to take place. And in so doing, we were actually the first building to be built on that super barren land. So it was really tabula rasa, which is really there's nothing built there at the moment. It was just a lot of very bad soil, so not a lot of things can grow there, and then very big swamps. So what we thought of, first of all, is that it needs some sort of structure, some sort of order in that wilderness, right? So it's a bit like a wild land. So because Gamuda, so our clients are Gamuda, they also built a lot of infrastructure in Malaysia. So they built all the MRT tracks, they built all the roads, highways, and then they also started to build townships. So their townships were always given sort of a lot of placemaking values, like it has a central lake or it has a very nice forest environment, etc. But we wanted to really bring about the fact that it is a sub-center, which means that it is quite urban. So I'm not sure whether you know or you have been exposed to it, but there is a sense of how do you build in an urban environment? So Singapore is 100% urban, right? And I think as you graduate, maybe if you have a chance, you can build in other parts of the world which are not so urban. So how does a Singaporean who grew up in a very urban condition bring in something that is very much a Singapore approach into a place that is very rural? So that's also something that we always encounter, and we are very interested to pursue that as well in our practice. So for the start, we thought it would be amazing if we planted the trees first as a move to bring down the temperature. So um, a quite different from Singapore. Malaysia is very built up in the city center and it's always very hot. So we thought one way of creating a drop in temperature was to really create the context. So the site context was going to be this 1,000 trees that will be planted in a grid. And it was also very good because the client wanted to showcase their tree planting nursery. So because they build highways, right? So highways always require trees. So they also have a huge market in creating, they're almost like instant trees where they have a nursery and then they plant it into this. So it's called ATR, so automatic tree renewal or something like that. So that's the first move that we did. And then sticking to the structural grid of the trees, which are 6 meters by 6 meters, we inserted a structural grid of the building. So the structure of a building would then take the form of the spaces that are required. So one way to think about it was to see a grid of buildings in a grid of trees. So that was the sort of idea that was taken up by the client as something very meaningful for them to do. And it was also the first thing that we did to present to the client. So how would this gallery look like? And how would this gallery be? And again, using that very simple move of a rotational geometry, we created one gallery first, and then we rotated it and mirrored it across the whole site on a very pinwheel sort of arrangement. And what we wanted to do also was, because it's a sales gallery, so it's a bit like a museum, you curate the route through the sales gallery, and it fitted in very nicely with the story that they were trying to tell about how do you sell the spaces of the township to the potential buyers. Um, as with most projects, I think you all know we build models to illustrate what the building will look like. And I think this showcased the very few elements and very few geometrical moves that we did for this particular project. Eventually, we built better models, bigger models. We also did like renders on how the spaces would be like. But it was actually a very simple move. It was just literally creating these tree branches to hold the building up, the roof up, and to clad it with a more or less perforated screen to allow light to be filtered in. And our clients liked it very much, so they also built their own models. So this was a model built by the client, which they very graciously donated to us. And this is the eventual building. So this was shot sometime before COVID. I think it's still there. So whoever's interested can take a trip to KL and see it on the way to the city. So really it was understanding how do we break down the complex structure of it's actually a simple structure, but how do you incorporate things like lighting, M and M&E is called mechanical and electrical systems. So like your power, your air conditioning, your lighting, etc. How do you do all that embedded into one thing, which was actually this tree branch? So the tree branch became the only thing that we fabricated, and we were very keen to make sure that it was done very, very well. So because our clients were infrastructural builders, they actually, so these are the components. They actually have a factory that built all these things off-site. So it's called prefabrication, and it is a very it's like you build the mold for one thing and then you repeat it. So it's a bit like a cake mold, right? You cast the concrete in this mold and then it gets repeated. So we had to devise how this tree structure became able to be made into a mold, first of all, and how it would be incorporating all the other components that are needed in it, and how are we going to transport it to site. So there were a few criterias that we had to, of course, tick off the checklist to do. But eventually we did it and they were very pleased. So this is actually a view of what it looked like in the factory. That's me taking a photo at the full scale mock-up, which we then had to sign off with our client. And then it was fabricated in its modules and it was transported to site. So the amazing thing about prefabrication is the speed of construction. So in a typical building, it takes a very long time before you can do the interior works. But because they wanted it to be done very quickly, actually this entire structure system was in place in 3 months. And it was watertight in 3 months, which is a real feat considering that it is 11,000 square meters worth of space and is double story as well. So so in order to achieve that, what we did was we designed all these and we spent a lot of time designing it. But the fabrication and the installation was so fast that actually it made sense. So design economy is also about rationalizing it on paper and understanding the method of getting it built so that it doesn't lengthen the entire process. It actually makes it the same amount of time, but the time is spent more equitably because you kind of design more, right? So you spend more time designing, but you actually build less or you build for a shorter period of time. So that's kind of the rationale that we had and we explained it to the client and they were very, very supportive. So they really enjoyed the entire process as well because it pushed their fabrication yard to think about things in ways that they would never be able to think about. So they were doing all these square boxes that were like toilets, etc. before we challenged them to do this. So then when they did it, they were very, very pleased with it. So I don't know, there might be trees sprouting in other parts of Malaysia now that they have the mold. But this was the finished product and we were very happy with it because it was actually very simple, but it created both an architectural expression as well as the taking into account all the other things that were needed for a space. So there's small pictures of it. And this was the entire model of the township that they were trying to sell. Plants, which hopefully are more lush now, and the interior courtyard space. So we really wanted to just create these pinwheel, really to also create this internal courtyard that was like a bit of a sanctuary. After all the hustle and bustle of the outside selling and all that, right? So you come here to think whether you want to spend $3 million on a house. And then these are all the little details that are really something that we think quite a lot of as well is how do you put together simple, inexpensive materials, but put together in a way that showcases the design process. So if you see this, this is not just one type of hole size for the perforated metal. It's actually 4 different hole sizes, but they are split as they go up. So the thinking is that as the sun sets, more light can, less harsh light can come into the space. So the hole size were bigger, and you also wanted to see more as you come down. And then we also spend some time on interior elements like the screens, the doors, how they interfaced with things like TVs, etc. And landscaping as well. How do you light up the space? How do you light up the building at night? What will it look like with this grid of trees? So this is some night shots, which I think captured that layering very well and the simplicity of all the maybe 2 or 3 elements only in the entire space. And day views. Okay, so that's for KL. We come back to Singapore now. So in Singapore, we did this as a competition again. So being a small firm, a lot of our work comes through competitions or friends' recommendation. And this was a school for special needs children. It's at Queenstown. So all of you who know Queenstown Library, it's actually the space next to Queenstown Library. It's an extension of the existing Rainbow Centre that was on Margaret Drive. So how we saw it was again, the brief of a school is incredibly complex, especially a school for children that start at 3 year old and end up in the same school at 18 years old. So can you imagine to create a kindergarten, primary school, and secondary school all in one space, and JC all in one space, and they also have a lot of physical needs, right? Because they are not really 100% able. So we first started by understanding what does it mean to be in a school, and the first unit that we looked at was the classroom, because the children actually spend a lot of time in the classrooms. And how do we use the classroom as a unit of investigation and to put it together and aggregate it together such that it becomes eventually the form of a school? And I think what we also wanted to encapsulate in the entire form was the various parties. So this is actually showcasing how many people we actually have to deal with for a single project like this. So you see all the different people, right? From authorities to clients to project team to contractor. There are like many, many people that we have to talk to. And we feel that the easiest way to talk to them is to give them a commonality. So the framework that we look at, how we see our building, has to be very simple for everybody to understand, and everybody with very different backgrounds to understand. So it cannot be like very, very complex for the architecture consultant team, then very, very simple for the contractor team because they need to learn how to build it. But it needs to be of a certain level that there is enough in it for everyone to offer their own inputs into the space. So I think that's something that we think quite carefully about as well when we are doing the work. And of course, the project brief and the client's eventual usage of it had to come into play right at the very start. So, with the unit of a classroom, we also wanted to align with the way Rainbow Center tries to empower their students to step by step become more able to look after themselves, become more able to be autonomous and be able to also thrive in whichever community that they're in. So we wanted to actualize that sort of motto of the school into the building form itself. So we called it Chasing Butterflies, Building Rainbows, because it was Rainbow Center, and it was really that childlike pursuit of improvement, right? We felt that that was something that, and that curiosity into this different spaces. So by using that unit of a classroom, we actually expanded it and contracted it accordingly based on the brief that was given to us. So for example, a lecture theatre will need like 4 different classrooms, right? So it's actually the same unit, but it was combined 4 times. Or like it was a classroom, but it needed a wet area for the children to play with water. So it was a classroom, added to it would be a balcony. So with that unit of a classroom, we managed to streamline the entire brief that you see over here into just each unit with its own push and pull factor. So just by doing that, it was easy for the teachers, etc., to also understand how to teach, because every classroom was the same size. It just had additions or subtractions based on whatever they wanted to add or subtract from the space. And the ones on the left is the existing block, and we wanted to keep that same typology of a courtyard again, because the students were so used to going to school in a courtyard building. We didn't want to lose that feel of familiarity. So this actually shows what the school is, the existing school. It's very dark. It's like double loaded corridor. So it was a central corridor with 2 classrooms on the side. So it made it very dark, and it wasn't really very used very much. So we devised with the principal and also the teaching staff this sort of like learning centers. So learning centers would eliminate all corridors basically. They just come to a central space and it just splits into the different classrooms. And by doing that, it also ties back to funding. So if y'all all know, right, all buildings need to be funded somehow. Someone's need to pay the bill. So in this particular project, we had 3 parties that funded it. So it was the MOE, MSF, and also Rainbow Center themselves. So we also use these diagrams of architecture to explain how they can fund the project. And of course, we showcase the different ways in which that push and pull can happen. So when we talked about it, they also start to become environmental filters. So not just to kind of increase the area due to the requirement of the school and the teachers, they actually become also environmental negotiations depending on which facing the building is doing. Right? And then it gets developed into materiality, into the way in which we would like the materials to inform. So if you see here, when it's at the top, it's actually a screen. As it goes on to the bottom, it becomes balconies, and right at the bottom, it becomes a almost like a semi open room space that the children can use. And we are quite obsessed with modularity because we feel that with modularity, construction gets easier. Contractors know what they need to build, and then they just repeat it as a many amount of times that we want it to be repeated. So we try to devise also our buildings with a sort of thinking that you just need to do one thing right, but you do it many, many times over. So that's that space that you see here. So it's a semi-indoor outdoor space that the children get to enjoy. And it's very, very nicely filtered with the daylight coming in at most times of the day. Um, so you don't have that very, very dark kind of feel anymore in the classrooms. And this is what I mean. So the contractor worked with us to devise modules of the facade elements, and these are them really fabricating it on site. And then we do a lot of testing as well. So these are the color tests for the facade. Eventually, even the plants got a bit tired of us, so they grew over all the mock-ups that were on site. And then this is the final building. So we tend to keep our buildings quite simple as well in terms of its materiality and its color, and we try to use programs to inspire the color or the textures of the internal spaces. So only like our graphic designer decided to use color, but if you see the rest of the building, it's actually very neutral. It's also less disturbance for the children using the space. And this was the competition model and the competition entry. And this is the eventual building that was built. So it didn't really stray very far from the impact that we wanted to achieve right from the start. And I think that's something that we felt was really held true because we had a very strong diagram and a very strong framework to start with. That's why it could really not lose sight of the key intentions right from the very beginning. So I think that's something that I also try to teach my students. It's to always be very sure how is your ideas translatable to be understood by everybody that's working on it, such that they all hold that idea very, very strongly in their head and they try to make it happen. So in section, I think a lot of these internal courtyards then became wind channels, wind chimneys in a way, and it actually funnels air through the space so that they can use these external spaces now and be protected and have a lot of wind and ventilation and daylight coming into the space. Previously, their courtyards were not very used because it was in the hot sun, right? So similar to like LaSalle, for example, we now have like covered courtyards or semi-covered courtyards. So the courtyards get used a lot for like events, for spill outs of the classrooms, for things that happen on a daily basis. So they are very, very used spaces. And the advantage of it is also it is able to be seen from various floors of the building. And you always get involved with whatever's happening. So it's not a closed-in school whereby you have classrooms and then you don't know what's happening behind in the classrooms. It's actually a very good support system as well because the teachers actually then watch out for each other. So the culture and the way the school has evolved is very much driven by the opportunities that the architecture has given them. So architecture is also able to change how people use spaces and how people lead like a everyday sort of life. And I think that's something also that we really, really believe in, and we want that to happen in most of our buildings. So more photos of how it's being used. This is actually the staff room, and it also can spill out into the courtyard spaces. And this is actually a cafeteria, and we held quite a number of events, public outreach events. So if y'all want to visit, it's open every weekend. There's a very nice cafe there. It's just next to Queenstown MRT station. That area is apparently quite happening now, according to my kids. And you can take part in a lot of these events. So yeah, do visit it. It's a nice place to go to on a weekend. So that's that. Okay, then we go out of Singapore again. So this time we go to Africa. So we had this opportunity to do a housing project. It's in Kenya in Africa, and we wanted to show. So we didn't want to um, adopt the design sensibilities of the African kind of culture, etc. I mean, we felt like we needed to offer something Singaporean. We felt like we needed to do something that was only able to be done. I mean, of course, it can be done by anybody else in the world, but we wanted to also show some aspect of being who we are. And I think our identity as a Singaporean architecture firm kind of is a bit more illustrated in this project. So one of the key things that we do, and we do that quite a lot, is we try to see our constraints first of all. So the constraints in this project all the way in Africa is actually by a Singaporean client who has lived there for 20 years. And their family owned some of these factories that used to be in the outskirts of the city, but now because Nairobi has grown so much, is now in the city center. So instead of being a factory, which is a waste of land, they decided that they want to develop it, and they wanted to create affordable housing for the people who are coming into the city. So again, we saw the context. So the context is literally this. It's like coexistence with nature in the middle of a city. And we started to look at parallels, like what made Nairobi similar to Singapore. And surprisingly, Nairobi is on the same equator line as Singapore. Okay, that's the first similarity. Nairobi as a city is almost the same size as Singapore. So in terms of the square footage, etc., it's very similar. And then we started to also look at, okay, how are they dealing with cars? So Nairobi has a huge issue with motor vehicles because the city has expanded way, way, way faster than they expected, and their cars and infrastructure cannot cope with that. So the eventual outcome of all the things that leads to the densification of Nairobi was that there were many, many houses that is like what you see here that have mostly roads. So there's a lot of protest in Nairobi about a loss of the land, right? The loss of real land like farmland and green land, etc. Because everything looks like what you see at the bottom. It's just all hardscape now. And this was the actual plot of land. So again, it's very hard, right? It's actually the client's factory. They make infrastructural pipes. So going onto the site itself, it's actually a very clean, square, rectilinear land. And this is the existing housing types in Nairobi right now that's on offer. It's actually a lot of cars because I think the culture there is that they need to park the car where their house is. So they park the car downstairs and then they just walk up. But we wanted to challenge that typology because we felt that there was enough pros of putting in nice spaces that can be used for other things other than just parking cars. So this was actually a project that was done by our client organization. They did this project as their own venture into development, and they wanted to repeat this because our clients being Singaporeans also decided that, hey, what's the best way of making money there? So what they did was they bought the formwork of to make the concrete walls of this development. So our client came to us and said, you definitely need to make the plan very similar because I only have this amount of formwork and I don't want to buy any more. So, so that was a very interesting problem that we had to solve as well. So not just how do you make the space look nice, you also have to make it without changing too much of the existing. So what we did is we started to look at the good thing about that, and we wanted to then, this is a regular HDB precinct, right, where you always have like this downstairs spaces where you have your children's playground, you have all your communal facilities, and it's a lot nicer than just looking at cars, really. So we thought, hey, how about we introduce this idea of a multi-story car park? This is something very ubiquitous in Singapore. You see it all over Singapore. You almost see it so much that you take it for granted. But actually, it's something very new in other parts of the world, and it comes about with a lot of opportunities. So the opportunity of doing a multi-story car park is that instead of having cars parked along all the roads, you actually can compress them into just one footprint of a multi-story car park, thereby releasing all the other spaces to be going back into activities that can support the neighborhood and the precinct. So how do we then deal with that one single floor plan that we had to put in? So really, we started to look at, again, how do we mirror a floor plan? How do we rotate a floor plan? How do we make a floor plan that is an intermediate floor plan as well as a corner floor plan? And just with that one single floor plan, we had 450 units being done and 6 variations. So we actually, just with changing of windows, etc., and door position, we managed to create a varied elevational treatment and varied form of the floor plan itself. And how do we actually put them together in around this freed up public space? Again, we started testing corner units, intermediate units. How do we put them together? They're all like through a central vertical core. And then in a collective, how do you fit 450 units with the same amount of cars that you require onto the entire site? So we started by, again, using just one corner and then mirroring it, and then mirroring it the other way, and doing the central sort of arrangement and mirroring that. So actually, this entire thing came out only from one floor plan, but it's the sort of thinking about how do you put them together, a bit like how do you play your reverse or your Go, right? How do you put them on a chessboard such that they create the sort of spaces that we want to create? So that central space for a larger swimming pool, and then the smaller pockets of spaces that serve really that smaller precinct or smaller locale of that cluster of walk-up apartments. So then these were the sort of images. Right now it is they're trying to gear up for building it. So after COVID, I think COVID struck it very, very harshly, so it was on hold for a bit, but hopefully we are getting to building stage. So let's see how it goes. But we are very excited about it. So the next few ones I'll go through quite quickly, so I think time is running up. We are, I just wanted to show this because this is very, very close to my heart. It's very much more of a smaller scale, and it's actually a lot more to do with crafting and looking at materiality and looking at how you put pieces together. So this was a bridge that we did in NJC, and it was a very small project. It was actually a project just to link up the one on the extreme top, which is the boarding house, with the school, the college at the bottom. And the principal said, okay, you guys are architects, right? Give me a very interesting, iconic build structure. Then I said, okay, but it's just a link bridge. You really, like, how iconic can a link bridge be, right? So we said, okay, we cannot promise you an iconic thing, but we can promise you that we will think very carefully about how we want to do this. And then she said, yeah, and then you have to make it all fit within this budget that I have, which was obviously very low. So we were like, okay, now how do we think about it? So we of course went back again to how we normally think about things. So what is a link bridge, right? A link bridge is simply a shelter that needs to shelter a student from one site to another site. And there is this asymmetrical, so it's not a straight line, as you can see in plan, it's actually a bit of a diagonal, right? So how do you create a form that is the same and can be repeated, but also absorb all these other side constraints that we have, and obviously budget constraints, right? So we said, how about we look at it as a conventional link bridge? It's actually really like a covered walkway. So if you in anywhere in Singapore, you will have all these covered linkways, right? And actually, they're all very simply constructed. They are just like portal frames, and they are on footings, and they just support a very, very lightweight roof. But the opportunity comes when you start looking at the pitches of the roof. So you don't just do a single pitch. So what we allude to at the college site was is actually a much more sheltered sort of arrangement, because the college students are more like secondary school age group. And then as you go into the other side, the left side, which is the boarding house students. So the right side is the boarding house, the left side is the college. And then as you go to the college, they are like JC level. So we started looking at it as a way in which you can, so as a way of like creating a tent-like structure at the boarding house, and it slowly flares up to become a more pavilion and more formal structure. And also because we have to allow for fire and engine accessway, so we also needed to raise that bar a lot higher at where it touches the college building. So just by creating that incremental shifts in the geometry of the roof, firstly, the contractor knows exactly what to do because it's actually the same way of joining the roof members to the covering. It's the same sort of footing system. It's the same way of attaching the lights, etc. And the only change is that it's just an increment every time you go to the next one. So I think we enjoy that very much because we actually like the conversations that we have with our contractor. And I think at the end of the day, they also quite like that they have managed to make something quite different looking for the conventional, just by doing very, very small tweaks in the whole construction methodology. And actually, it doesn't really look very different from this, right? This is like a HDB covered walkway that you see all over the place. So that's essentially what we did from the boarding house, which was a tent-like structure, all the way to the college part, which is a pavilion-like structure, and was really just flaring it out as you go along. And at night, we had some nice shots taken at the night as well. Another, I think this is the last project that I'll be showing already. It's also in NJC, and this is another problem. Okay, so NJC, I don't know who the architect was, but the principal always comes to us, and also I'm alumni, so she just makes use of the alumni card a lot. So she was like, okay, I have another issue now. I wanted to make this space into my library, but the sun comes in very, very hot in the midday and we cannot use the space at all. So can you think of a very nice way of shielding it, but also done in an artistic way? And also for that very, very low budget again. So how do you then create something that deals with the key thinking of the key solution, right? The key thing was to create something to shield the light. So we started looking at the sun path. So the sun path is from east to west. And how do you then create a geometry with a single bale of red cloth? So we contacted suppliers. What is the maximum length of red cloth can you buy? Because NJC's color is red color lah, so that was why it's red. But so they gave us the dimensions, and we said, okay, how about we think about folding it in a way that allows for the maximum shading to take place. So with that one bale of cloth, we just multiplied it by the size of the skylight, and we came up with these strips that were just cut out from a single bale. And because cloth is very light, so we just inserted little stainless steel rods to weigh it down. And that was it. That was the design. And actually it just came out from post-it paper that we put together, and then we're like, oh, okay, that looks about right, about the kind of size of a bale of cloth. But of course it needed to be then translated, given to the person who sewed it up, and put in all the like stainless steel, and then described to the contractor so that they know how to mount it. But that was eventually it. It was just a very simple, effective shade for that space. So that's it. That's who we are. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack.
Mm.
Actually, these sessions are always very enjoyable for me because when we hang out, we talk about everything except
Yes,
design.
exactly.
So only, when you guys like Colin and Xinghui, you all come and share, then I actually understand your design or what you're doing.
Yes.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.
I mean, personally, I'm really very impressed at how you guys always. I mean, as small studios, there's always, if people give you an interesting project, they give you a small budget,
Yes.
right? And you actually manage to come up with all these really, really amazing sort of solutions, really taking advantage of constraints. And in fact, as you were sharing, this language of repetition, which is very clever because it obviously saves costs, and yet you develop a very strong visual language using repetition. So I think that is what really impressed me with a lot of the projects, especially Rainbow Center. So I think the first question, maybe I'll start off before we throw it to the students. In real projects, of course, there's a lot of complexities that you have to deal with as you did the diagram, and many parties that you have to kind of collaborate with. So what do you think that in school, most briefs do not call for such grappling of these complexities? And sometimes without these constraints, it's also hard to design,
Yes.
right? Which
Yes.
is, that's why our
Yes.
lives are so hard, right? Well, architects are masochists.
Yes.
Got constraint, then you can think, right, to
Yes.
solve. But
Yes.
when there are no constraints, sometimes it becomes such a blank canvas
Correct.
that more often than not, the students actually struggle because don't know when to start.
Yes.
And you're also a design educator. So my question would be, how then does a student that without all the real world complexities can create an interesting project? What do you think are the fundamentals of a good design project?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think it's something that we talk about a lot with our students because I think at this age you have not done as many projects obviously because you're just starting out, right? And also you might not have the vocabulary in your head yet of what kind of forms do you use to create certain things, what kind of proportions do you do. So to me, I always feel like there's an invisible connection between your brain and your hands. And a lot of times I encourage my students to make stuff. So when you make, right, you are actually rationalizing it as well. You're thinking about how you're making because firstly, there are things that are very fundamental like structure and all that. Firstly, when you make something, you need to make it stand, right? You cannot like flop around. Like when you do 3D, you make it on a 3D thing, you can like imagine it like cantilevers and doesn't fall down. But when you actually make something, if it doesn't stand up, then it's not going to work, right? So that's the fundamental thing. So a lot of these sort of complexities are embedded in very real situations. Like gravity is very real. The sunlight coming into a space is very real. Whether or not you get rain on when you walk from one place to another is very real. So these are the reality checks in a way. So it's in a way I feel like we teach something complex, but actually we also try to teach it in a more simple way. And I think simplicity is quite overrated in a way, right? And underrated. Like you need to see things in a simple way first and understand what is your outcome that you want. So instead of going onto like Google or Pinterest to see all these amazing buildings, because they're amazing because these people have been doing it for so many years and it's like the highlight reel, right? Is to really ask yourself as the designer or as the architect, what do you want your user to feel? Sometimes you want your users to feel like they are in a very well ventilated space, and that could just be a very strong reason why you have created a room in some sort of wind chimney situation. Then you go and look into like, how do you make wind happen? How do you make spaces fit together so that it drives the wind when the wind comes in the monsoon season? So you then put things together and then you test it out, and you go downstairs and you say, oh, do you think my little stick or whatever you put in your model can move in the wind when I put it in a prevailing wind direction? And actually, for Rainbow, we built many models and we tested it in our rooftop. We will just go up to the roof and say, oh, the sun, because the sun doesn't change whether you have a small thing or a big thing, right? Is the sun direction is still the same. The rain direction will also be the same. The wind direction is also the same. So you can actually make really small models to test all those things that are there. And things that are embedded, the logic is embedded in the making are things like structure, things like fenestrations, windows, how do you compose things together? Those are embedded already when you are doing the making. So I tell my students, and I think that you need to empower yourself by using your hands more, because only through using your hands you discover that actually I'm really good at composition of things, or I'm really good at putting things together in a certain way that nobody else can do it because it's my hands and I'm doing it, right? So I think a lot of students don't give enough credit to what they can do themselves, and I feel like by making it, it actually gives back that charge to yourself. Like, I'm the only one making this, so I need to make it look good, right? And therefore, my brain tells me certain things, and some things are quite subconscious, really. So you should just try. Yeah.
Thanks for that. I totally agree. I think making models is one of the best ways to explore a design, especially when you have nothing. And a lot of times, my frustration with students is that they make one, then they're very happy already.
Yes.
Then the final project don't look so different. I think in between you really have to make a lot. If you
Yes.
ever had the opportunity to visit Jack's studio, my God, there's so many models, and they even have a 3D printing machine and all kinds of model making things. So that's how important it is. Oh, in fact, Jack use her hands so much. She is really good with pottery. She has her own pottery studio called Jackpot.
Yes. Yes, that's right. It's my
Quite
de-stress.
clever, right? Yeah, quite clever, yeah. So yeah, using your hands, right?
Yes.
It's so tactile, right?
Yes.
So I'm going to jump to the other extreme of using hands. What do you think of AI in design? Because so many
Yes.
students are actually kind of like toying with it right now.
Yeah.
What do you think of it?
I like it. I think it's a very interesting way of looking at, again, back down to this design economy. I mean, being Singaporean, right? You want it cheap, you want it good, you want it fast. AI kind of ticks a lot of those boxes. But as with all things automated, it needs a brain behind it. So even in our projects, whilst a lot of things look very automated, they start from a very analog route. And the analog route is really the thinking of what makes a scale shift interesting, right? What makes that? Is it 20 cm would create that difference, or does it need to be a 2-meter shift to make that difference? How much of a building in and out do you need to do before it creates a certain type of shadow, for example? So these things you can't tell like the AI to do, right? You need to still do it yourself first. You need to say, my thinking is to do this, but you give me the effect of it. So I think it helps to generate an effect that you can then see if it fulfills your criteria or not. But what I'm very, very excited about AI, right, is okay, so as an architect, you need to learn how to do drafting. So this thing is called a representational tool, because you need to make your building that you want to build be able to understood by the contractor who is actually building it. So very, very many years ago, when we were starting out as young architects like you guys, there's this architect called Frank Gehry, and he uses this very, very sophisticated last time software that translated all his buildings are curved lines, so there's no geometry involved, right? But he built this entire building that he designed into this software, and he just passed the entire software to the contractor. So it did not need that translation into 2D representation, then become 3D building. So to me, I feel that where we are going with AI, I feel that that's very interesting because you can really be very economical, first of all, with your time, because you don't have to then translate it into 2D, then translate it into 3D back again, right? And then the other thing that is very good about AI is it does all the legwork of making the most out of a single material, for example. So if you know, like for prefabrication, we had to calculate how much concrete goes into that mold, how much can a trailer carry to transport it from one location to another, and even like how much does it cost to ship like glass from Czechoslovakia to Malaysia. So these are like things which I feel can be automated and can really, really be a very good toolkit for an architect. So the architect doesn't need to waste time doing all these more, I mean, yes, it's constraints, but it's also sometimes very, very laborious. Like you have to go and look all over the world for like a specific type of plywood that can do what you want to do. But maybe AI can help in that because it is sort of your right brain part that calculates everything for you in a way, right? And you can get it to generate many, many different solutions. So it's a bit like looking for your cheapest etiquette when you want to go traveling. It already does that right now, right? You can just go to like Skyscanner or something, and then you can put in the dates, and it kind of curates the solutions for you. So I think as a tool, it can do that. But as a student, you need to know your fundamentals before you use AI. That's what I always tell my students. So the fundamentals are exactly what we talked about. That whole like composition, about like the theory behind what makes a good space, what doesn't make a good space, what makes a good piece of architecture, what doesn't make a good piece of architecture. How do you use your body to calibrate a space, for example? Those are things which I don't think AI can really replicate or really teach in that sense. But once you have that, I think AI is amazing. It's like your another hand for you to use. So yeah, I think it's very good. But it's also very seductive, right? So I mean, you're all been on like social media, you've seen what Discord can do and all that. So it's very seductive to rely solely on AI. But if you know, you know lah, right? So if you know, you will know that it is not that. But it's good for storytelling. It's good for presentation. It's good for putting. But we are also good at seeing through the AI. We are good at filtering out all those things. I mean, now all our thesis students actually use AI to generate their final images, but we still interrogate them on the fundamentals. What does it take for you to generate that AI? I need to know. I need to know what ingredients go into your cake before I can tell you whether the cake is nice to eat or not, right? Yeah.
Thanks for that. So do you guys have any questions? I mean, this is a good opportunity to ask anything you want.
No, no, no.
Oh,
To bring them.
Okay. I'm just curious.
Yes.
Actually, I remember you were adjunct lecturer at one of the crates. So a lot of things that you said still aligns with what I believe in design. But moving away from that, because I see a lot of your project is a lot of prefab construction. And I feel like, yeah, towards the industry now, it's a very like efficient way. But is there times where it wasn't like aligning to your vision, and how do you like explore other options where prefab wasn't like as good as a solution? Yeah.
Yeah, interesting question. I think that's a um, very keen understanding of how we work. And I think as we evolved, we felt that it is something that we can uh, always fall back on as a way to generate a first level of a design that can be easily understood. But as you say, maybe there are projects that do not rely on this sort of aggregation or aggregative logic or modulating logic. So now what we are trying to do in a way is also to see um, what is the percentage of modulating it. So whilst it is aggregative, it also references itself to change a little bit. So it's a little bit like scripting, right? Like you script something to be repetitive, but you don't script it to be exactly repetitive. You script it to be maybe 60% repetitive, for example, and the 40% is the other thing that you want in your project. So we like to calibrate our projects based on that kind of understanding whether or not it should be repetitive. And if it's repetitive, it's for a purpose. It's either for ease of construction or it is for a very specific client requirement. For example, now we are doing a home for disabled adults. After doing the home for disabled children, we're doing a home now, and the repetition is necessary because they need to have repeated spaces to feel um, comfortable. And that's very, very interesting for us because it aligns with somewhat how we want the building to look like eventually. But whilst doing that, we have another sort of understanding of what the eventual form will look like. So the eventual form might not look like a repetition anymore. The eventual form can look quite organic. It can look quite different from this modulated logic that took place. But the modulated logic needs to be there because it needs to be the space that people move through every day needs to have that sort of component in it. So so yes, I mean I think if I were given a project brief that said you do not need to modulate, I would still put it in as a criteria for myself to work with because I like to think that way. And I think that it has evolved through many years of thinking that way that has become almost our signature. So in a way for designers or young architects, it's really also trying to find what speaks to you when you design, right? What kind of a designer are you? What is the thing that is most critical that you like to think about when you design? So you have seen, I guess, the other two speakers, they might have very, very different approaches. And those are just different ways of starting. And but the fundamental is still to create good spaces, right? That's still a thread that commonly links all of us that work in this industry together. And it's also to be very responsible to your clients because they're paying so much. And sometimes it's really difficult for them to get the funding. Like for Rainbow Center, they had to raise funds for almost 10 years before they could have a building. So you do have a responsibility to make sure it's a nice space and it's a great improvement from what they originally have. Yeah. Does it answer your
Yeah,
question?
thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Anything? You can ask me about anything. Ask me about the practice. You can ask about school. You can ask about NUS.
Okay, maybe I'll throw in a question here. You've actually built a design in quite a lot of different countries. How different is it to like design in all these different like Malaysia lah, then Africa, right? Yeah.
Yes.
And yeah.
Yeah. What I found very interesting is communication. So what I think we do tend to put a lot of time in is how do we create a set of a framework in not just design framework but also in a communication framework that speaks to everyone that we deal with in the way that is able to transcend sometimes language, not really lah, because everyone speaks English, but transcend the sort of read between the liners of culture. So by putting it out there, that's why I think also making of models and doing drawings is very important, because when you make models and do drawings, you don't need to use a language to explain it. So that helps a lot in the cutting through of these cultural read between the lines. So a funny story is when I was doing the African project, right? It was very funny because there is this invisible cultural, I guess, from the African team side of like saying yes to everything. So they actually keep saying yes. We were happily just doing our design. We didn't really know very much. Then until our client came back and said, yeah, that yes actually doesn't mean yes. It just means that they have heard you. And I was like, oh, okay. Then we had to go back to them again and ask them, okay, so for this particular part, is it okay to be done this way? Then they were like, yes. Then they said, okay, maybe you have to sketch back to us what you can actually build. And then when they did that, then they was like, oh, okay, can work. So there was many like to and fro. So communication is important because it helps them to also be joint author in the project, because a project is never just an architect's project. It's actually a project is shared a bit lah, like collaboratively among the entire team, from client to contractor to even end user sometimes. So everyone, if they have a stake in your project, they will want it to be built. So that's our fundamental way of approaching most of our projects. We try to get everyone to be on the team. So so instead of saying like this is my vision, we will say that this is the vision that would help to do certain things for you, for example. So in doing so, it becomes less of a us and them, it becomes a together thing. So even in school, right, when you talked with your friends and all that, it's a really it's very easy to be very protective of your own ideas. But I mean, after practicing for so many years, the ideas are very easy to come by. Actually, ideas are like, I keep telling my students, I can sit here and have 10 ideas, but in order to make the 10 ideas work, that's when the hard part comes in. So ideas are a dime a dozen, and everyone has good ideas. I mean, you're all in this school. I'm sure you're really good designers. You have fantastic ideas, but the caveat is you need to make it work. And the working part is when your education comes in. That's when you think in a way to make it work differently from, let's say, a contractor or an engineer or a landscape architect or somebody else, right? I mean, as the designer, you rely on your education to lead the process of how to make it work. I think that's the fundamental difference. Yeah.
Talking about
think-
leading the process, yesterday I saw a meme that was quite funny. In the past, the architect is like the
Yes.
conductor of orchestra, right? Very
Yes.
grand.
Yes.
The meme was like this guy is jumping down the bungee. All the people prepping him is contractor, engineer,
And then he takes the
client.
fall.
Yeah, everybody is waiting to push the architect down for the bungee jump.
Yes. It often feels like that.
Yeah,
Yes,
so it's
everyone doesn't want to say anything until you are the first person. You're always the first and last person. Yeah, in every meeting, everyone will be like, we're just waiting for you to come to start. I was like, but you can just start. No, we need you to come and start. We're like, okay.
we shoulder
Yes.
all the
Yes,
responsibility. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Any other question? No more. Okay. Then maybe some parting words for the students, because some of them are actually graduating soon in April. So
Okay.
some advice, some
Yes.
encouraging words.
Anybody who wants to intern in our office is more than welcome to send in their CVs.
My cousin interned at her office. He almost died.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, he was working on an African project. Parting words. I think it's always very exciting to start on the next chapter of your life after graduation. And being in school is amazing. I mean, you have so many good tutors here. You have an amazing, nice building to be in. You have, you're in the city center of Singapore. Go out and see things. I think that's something which I always encourage all my students to do. Don't go around with your eyes closed. Don't just like do all night. I mean, of course, my do all nighters like Kelley. Yeah, cannot say don't do all nighters, but go out, experience the city, like experience things. Know why this building looks nice to you, why it doesn't. Some people might hate this building and say it doesn't gel. It doesn't like speak to me. Then what does, right? Be you're in this industry, I always tell my students, our currency is space. So you need to know your currency. You need to know that this is what you have to deal with. You have walls, floor, ceiling. That's really much what you have. And expose yourself to as many conditions of that as possible. You can go to like really, really old buildings, and then maybe you can discover something about them that is very nice. It's not like only the new buildings are worth going, or all those that you see on Instagram are worth going, right? You can always go to like the Sim Lim Square, and I mean there are things which are very exciting being in this part of the world already. So you don't need to feel like you have to visit all your Instagram celebrity type of architectural buildings, really. There's so many good quality buildings and spaces to appreciate. So do go out there and see things, and I don't know, get involved, I suppose, right? Like there's also things to do with sustainability that's already around. There's a lot of free workshops that you can join. There are a lot of like lunchtime talks also, not here and in NUS, in SUTD, in other colleges. Just go and talk to people. I always tell students architects are very generous with their time actually. You just need to knock on the door and look a bit like sad, like, oh, I don't think architecture is for me. And then they were like, oh, come in, come here. Let's talk about architecture or talk about design to you. So we're very generous with our time. We don't mind sharing. We encourage students to visit us and ask any questions they want to ask, see how architecture firms are, and even and also I also tell students that it's not a sunk cost fallacy, right? So if architecture is not for you, it's fine, do something else. You don't have to stick to it just because you enrolled in architecture course, right? So many people have gone on to do many different things, and it doesn't matter. Like for me, I love pottery, and oh yeah, and don't give up on things that you love, right? Because a lot of my peers, they might love to do something, but because architecture is so time consuming, they gave up on it, and now they're like our age and they're like, oh, I wish I didn't give up on that. So make time for things that you love doing, that gives you that very instant gratification. Not like watching TikTok lah, of course, because there's like instant gratification for everyone. But things that are like that 10,000 hours thing is very real. I mean, after doing pottery since I was 16 till now, it's been way more than 10,000 hours. And you do get a sort of satisfaction when you reach a certain level. So don't give up, even if you're beginners at, like, say, music or singing or dancing or whatever. If it gives you a lot of joy to do it, and it just takes up like 2 hours, 3 hours of your time, make time for it. Or if you like exercising or playing a game or whatever, don't give up on it just because you happen to be an architect in future, right? Yeah.
That's really good advice. And
Yeah.
last advice, of course, get a good internship. And if you are ready to work very, very hard,
Yes.
but I'm sure you learn a lot at the Plystudio. So with that, please, big round of applause for
Thank
Jacqueline
you.
Yeo, Plystudio. Thank you so much.